Hello, I'm Robin Ince, and I, Helen, am a non-scientist. And I am here for entirely selfish reasons. I am here for the reason that I like being alive, and it seems that science really helps that possibility. And this is something that we must not forget. I realise that everyone here, if you actually looked back at the history of your family, how many of us would not be alive if it wasn't for well-used curiosity? This is what we fight for all the time. This is what we mustn't forget. There are people who I meet sometimes who go, oh, I don't really like science. I think science is overrated. And they say that as they sit in their centrally heated house next to that clean water that comes out of their tap, watching television and having access to a library greater than Alexandria while not dying of smallpox. This is it. Curiosity is a beautiful thing. We are currently a very rare species. There might be many like us somewhere in the universe, but they have not been found yet. We are creatures that are able to look up at the sky and question what we see. We're able to look at ourselves and think about the code within us. We are able to see the beauty and the horror of being something that has developed through mutation, heredity and natural selection. These are wonderful things. Many of you will know that Brian Cox, by the way, who is not here today, I do a show with him. He was unable to come because he's having his new face fitted for a TV show. Yeah, you do know he is merely predominantly robot. It's a horrible thing, by the way. Brian Cox is actually a year older than me. Genetics is not always kind. So, it is very well. He delights in it. Helen delights in it. Every speaker you've heard here, and every scientist, for those of you who are not scientists like me, one thing you should know is do not be scared of asking questions. This is one of the things, when I tour with Brian Cox, very often we get questions from people going, I know this is probably a stupid question. And do you know what? Very rarely is it a stupid question. If it is a question from your heart, if it is a question that you really want to know the answer, if it is a question asked without facetiousness, then it is a good question. What? For me, trying to understand science, and it's difficult, right? When I meet physicists and that's basically what I do with Brian Cox. When we tour, for 15 minutes he talks about physics, and then I hear the beginning of the cracking of the brains of the audience. I go on, do some stupid voices for 4 minutes, they relax for a while, and then we continue. But this is the thing, it's a long journey. Science is not about coming up with the right answer. It is about coming up with the least wrong answer. And that is why it is delightful. Because it never ends. There are children here today, I've seen children 8, 9 years old. Some of those children will grow up to be scientists, and however long they live, none of them will live long enough to hear the words, well, that's science finished then. That's not going to happen. That is one of the things that we need to tell as many people as possible when they go. A journalist, I argued with a journalist once, the journalist said to me, he said, if science is so good, why do they keep having to change it? I said, that's why it is so good. That is why it's beautiful. Now, I'll just briefly mention two things. One, which was a very important thing, I've often quoted from him, and many of you will be fans of the work of Carl Sagan. And Carl Sagan's Pale Blue Dot is something that every single member of Parliament should read that book, because it's a very important thing to know. That we don't need national boundaries of curiosity. As John mentioned earlier on, there is this beautiful thing with science that everyone can communicate together. There is an international language of wonder. That is an important thing. We mustn't build new fake walls. We are a small planet with a splendid variety of life upon it at the moment. It is important to preserve that because, as Carl Sagan said in Pale Blue Dot, there is no hint that help will come from elsewhere to save us from ourselves. These are important things to remember for our children. And one of my family who died but just over a year ago, and they were born in 1939, they died last year, And one of their worries was, had they lived at the best time? They had lived at a time where they didn't have to fight in a war. And then they saw incredible progress in vaccination, progress in technology, progress in having time to relax and enjoy the world, to look through your telescope just for the sheer fun of it. And he said to me, he said, I worry, have I had the best life that any human will ever have? What we have to fight for is to make sure that all human beings and more human beings have access to clean water, have access to the chance to actually have those moments to lie on the ground and look at the sky. We can defeat suffering by using curiosity well. And behind me, of course, is Westminster Abbey where Isaac Newton is buried, and also very close by Charles Darwin. I wanted to end with a brief quote from Charles Darwin. And it's important to remember as well with Charles Darwin and his wife Emma, I would highly recommend you read the letters that they sent to each other, because, again, you see the beauty of the humanity of those two people and what they had to fight, the loss of their children, etc. But I'm just going to, a little bit from travelling as he was on the Beagle. This is a moment where he was in a Brazilian rainforest, and I think this is one of the most beautiful pieces of Charles Darwin's writing. The delight one experiences in such times as wandering through the rainforest bewilders the mind. If the eye attempts to follow the flight of a gaudy butterfly, it is arrested by some strange tree or fruit. If watching an insect, one forgets it in the stranger flower it is crawling over. If turning to admire the splendour of the scenery, the individual character of the foreground fixes the attention. The mind is a chaos of delight. That is what we need to try and infect as many people as possible with. That chaos of delight of being a creature on this earth that is able to ask questions and sometimes even begin to answer them. Thank you very much to everyone who's organised this. I believe there is going to be a song to end it all. Thank you to all the organisers. Thank you for turning up. Thank you so much for trying to come up with slogans and then going, I'm not sure we can use that slogan. There are some scientific problems with that particular chant. It was a beautiful thing to watch. I will hand you over to the organisers. Over to the organisers.